Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into corsets, fluffing up our powdered wigs, and tiptoeing under the moody moonlight to join a midnight picnic. But not just any picnic. No, this one happens in a Georgian-era cemetery, and you've been invited. You're not just showing up, you're preparing. There are rituals, layers of clothing that defy physics, and just a touch of social danger. So brace yourself. It's going to be absurdly elegant, slightly uncomfortable, and more than a little ghost-adjacent. Of course, you probably won't survive this. Literally, Georgian fashion was about as breathable as a soup tin, and God help you if you faint under all that whalebone scaffolding in the middle of a crypt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin the evening the way any self-respecting Georgian lady would, by slowly turning yourself into a fashionable sculpture. Your first enemy? Time. You need at least 2 hours and possibly a small staff to get ready for the graveyard. It's not like you can just slap on jeans and a hoodie. You stand in your dressing room, shivering slightly, as your maid laces up your stays, those charming little devices designed to compress your organs into something resembling decorative sausage links. As she tugs, you remind yourself that beauty is pain, specifically back pain, shallow breathing, and occasional rib misalignment. Then comes the panier, the side hoop contraption that turns your silhouette into a tea tray. You marvel at how your hips can now clear furniture by 3 feet on either side. It's not practical, but it's definitely a vibe. You wonder briefly how you'll fit through the cemetery gate. Sideways, probably. Once the structural engineering is in place, it's time for layers of camise, petticoats, silk, and brocade. The final effect? A glorious rustling confection that says, "I'm here to party, but only in the presence of tombstones." Now for the wig. Yours is powdered to perfection, towering high enough to block out moonlight. It smells faintly of lavender, pomade, and something else? Cheese? You try not to think about it. The truth is, many wigs of the period were reused, repowdered, and occasionally borrowed. Lice were not only a possibility, they were basically inevitable. You reach for your decorative hair stick, pretending it's not a multi-use scratching tool. Historians still argue whether women truly preferred these wigs or if they simply accepted them as part of the social contract, like wearing high heels in mud. Either way, you adjust your plumes and accept your fate. Now, accessories. A fan, of course, absolutely necessary for the social games ahead. Gloves to protect your hands from both the chill and the judgmental stares of other ladies. And a shawl embroidered with vaguely unsettling cherubs, because the night air is cool and cemetery dew can be unpredictable. You check your reflection in a tarnished mirror. You look ridiculous and glorious, and also kind of like you're preparing for a heavily stylized funeral, which, in a way, you are. Outside, the sun is vanishing behind layers of purple clouds. The light turns golden and then silvery. It's nearly time. You head down the creaking stairs, catching glimpses of candlelight flickering in sconces. Somewhere in the house, a grandfather clock groans out the hour like it's mourning its own existence. At the door, your maid hands you a tiny bottle of perfume. You dab it onto your wrists. It smells of roses and oranges and, inexplicably, faintly of shoe polish. You choose not to ask. A carriage is waiting outside, lanterns already glowing, casting long shadows across the gravel. The footman offers his hand, and you climb in as delicately as possible, hoping your skirts don't knock over any bystanders or small garden statues. The inside of the carriage is upholstered in faded velvet and lined with lace. You nestle in, clutching your fan and smoothing your skirts as the horses start their slow, clopping journey toward the cemetery. You lean your head against the window, watching the city blur past. Georgian London at night is a strange, buzzing place. You pass flickering oil lamps, the occasional shouting match, and one man attempting to serenade a cat. You nod approvingly. Artistic expression is important. As the buildings give way to quieter streets, your mind drifts. Why a cemetery? Why not a salon, or a drawing room, or even just someone's back garden? Well, because death was strangely fashionable. Mourning was an art form, and the lines between reverence and revelry were often beautifully blurred. You fan yourself gently as the carriage door creaks open, and a gust of damp night air drifts in, smelling faintly of moss, smoke, and maybe cabbage? You choose to ignore that last note. You step down with as much grace as your skirt architecture allows, the hem of your gown brushing against the dewy ground like the world's fanciest mop. The iron gates of the cemetery stand tall before you, their tips curled like the ends of a villain's mustache, and just behind them lies the dark, sprawling resting place of the recently, and not so recently, departed. But before you join your graveyard companions, you take a moment. You open your fan. It is a thing of beauty, swan bone frame, silk leaf painted with improbable cherubs and fruit bowls, probably imported, certainly overpriced. And more importantly, it's your tool of silent communication. In Georgian high society, a lady could say volumes with the flick of a wrist. Close the fan quickly, you're offended. Open it slowly, you're available. Tap your chin, you look like you wore that wig in the rain. The fan is not just for show, it's your social Swiss Army knife. You flutter it delicately, both to cool your forehead and to check for onlookers. No ghosts yet. Just a few other ladies arriving, equally encased in couture and towing the line between elegance and existential crisis. Fan language is not officially codified, but many believe it was an open secret. Historians still argue whether it was truly practiced across all classes or just something bored aristocrats used to pass the time between dance sets. Still, you've learned it well enough. Tonight, it will serve you in subtle rivalries and flirtations conducted entirely via flicks, taps, and occasional smirks. Your handmaid, who has accompanied you just far enough to check your wig's tilt and brush lint from your shawl, hands you a small embroidered pouch. "For the beetle situation," she mutters. You do not inquire further. Sometimes mystery is a kindness. You step through the gate, your shoes crunching over pebbles and cracked stone, and join a small knot of similarly dressed ladies. Each one is fanning herself, more from social reflex than actual temperature. It's cold, yes, but the corset makes real breathing difficult. You mostly fan yourself in solidarity. One woman flutters her fan with a slow circular motion. "I'm bored." Another taps hers against her hand twice. "That man over there is unworthy of attention." You consider joining in, but hold back. Better to let them make the first cryptic comment. You walk deeper into the cemetery, the group spreading out across paths lined with weathered tombstones and rusting iron fences. You catch glimpses of embroidered gowns, powdered faces, and candlelit parasols. It's an odd mixture of the funereal and the festive. Somewhere to your left, a harpsichord melody trickles from a traveling music box, carried on the fog like a half-remembered dream. As you find a spot to perch near a large angel-topped gravestone, you try to appear languid and mysterious, like you have recently recovered from heartbreak, or the plague, or both. Your fan rests open against your chest like a sigh. You overhear someone gossiping about Lady Portsmouth, who allegedly swooned so hard at the last midnight picnic that she cracked a headstone. This is probably not true, but you note it anyway. Future blackmail potential. Your fingers twitch the edge of your fan, and you catch the eye of a passing gentleman, young, slightly pale, probably not a vampire. Probably. You lift your fan to your face slowly and peek over the edge. This is textbook. "You're interesting, but please don't speak until I know if you're rich." He gives a subtle bow and moves on. You breathe out. That was exhausting. You glance around. Everyone's pretending not to watch everyone else, which means, of course, they're all watching everyone else. Fans flick, tap, and flutter in every direction. It's less of a conversation and more like an elegantly choreographed protest of having to speak out loud. You lean against the gravestone. It's damp, which you expected. The moss is oddly plush, though, like the ghost of upholstery. You dab at your brow with a lace handkerchief. The perfume from earlier mingles with the earthy scent of wet stone and the faint waxy sweetness of nearby candles. A light drizzle begins to mist from above. Several fans now double as shields against the moisture, although yours, made of delicate silk, does absolutely. You shift your weight delicately, trying not to squish any damp earthworms with your dainty embroidered shoes. They weren't exactly made for gravel paths or mossy headstones, but such is the price of style. The grave beneath you belongs to one Colonel Worthing. His tombstone reads like a short novel of patriotic deeds and questionable hunting habits. You nod politely at it. He seems like the type who wouldn't mind a bit of midnight company. A sharp breeze drifts through the cemetery, lifting the hem of your gown just enough to remind you that, despite all the elegance, you're essentially wearing a layered cake with no insulation. You feel a chill prickle along your spine, and not just from the weather. The layers of your outfit, while extravagant, are working against you. The corset, tied tightly enough to offer posture, but just loosely enough to avoid fainting, at least for the first 2 hours, compresses everything from your ribs to your hopes and dreams. Each breath feels like it has to file a request through a tightly regulated lung department. Now, about those underpinnings. Beneath your gown, you're entombed in shift, stays, stockings, garters, petticoats, and the ever-pesky panniers, which still threaten to knock over fellow guests if you turn too quickly. You're less human, more swaddled confection. You adjust your bodice. It's cut low, as fashion dictates, in a way that defies both gravity and modesty. Georgian fashion liked its busts presented like offerings on a satin platter. One false move, and you'd flash half the cemetery and probably get complimented for your daring neckline. You feel a slight itch under your camise, probably a stray bit of hay left over from the wig powdering process, possibly a moth, possibly regret. You give a dignified wiggle, which looks like a subtle adjustment to everyone else, but is, in fact, a full-body attempt at scratch relief. Historians still argue whether Georgian women genuinely tolerated this much discomfort with grace, or whether they simply complained more quietly than we do today. Letters from the era mention fainting, sweating, and strategically timed resting moments, but it's unclear whether these were from actual fragility or a clever excuse to get horizontal for 5 minutes. You know the truth. You've been laced tighter than a ham roast and perched like a fashion-forward gargoyle on a marble slab for nearly an hour. Grace is a fragile illusion. You're just trying not to pass out. You notice other women doing the same delicate dance, adjusting, shifting, pretending to admire the fog while secretly searching for somewhere to lean without damaging lacework or dignity. One particularly bold lady has brought a folding chair. It's covered in embroidered velvet and looks absurdly out of place next to the crumbling grave of an 18th-century fishmonger, but she sits with the ease of someone who has accepted that spinal compression is not her aesthetic. You envy her. Someone walks by with a silver tray of refreshments, small pastries shaped like skulls, probably filled with something alarming like fig and mustard.
You take one, nibble it politely, and pretend it didn't immediately glue itself to the roof of your mouth. You discreetly tilt your head back and blink rapidly, hoping gravity will intervene. Nearby, a gentleman with a jaw like carved marble and a waistcoat embroidered with death's head moths offers a bow. You curtsy back as much as your outfit allows, which is not much. It's more of a stiff dip, like you're trying to sneeze politely. You exchange pleasantries, though you're more focused on keeping your wig from catching fire from the nearby lanterns. Every few minutes, you pat it gently, just to ensure nothing's smoking. Wigs, after all, were not only elaborate, they were also highly flammable. It's like wearing a dry hedge on your head and then walking near open flame for several hours. You try to ignore the gentle creak of your corset as you laugh politely at a joke involving someone's uncle and a haunted outhouse. The gentleman moves on, and you exhale, well, as much as your current lung situation allows. The fog thickens slightly, curling around the headstones like a cat settling in for a nap. The light from the lanterns scatters across it, creating halos of orange and gold. It's oddly peaceful here.
You sway slightly where you stand, and whether it's from fatigue or the lingering effects of that fortified wine you sipped earlier, plums still in your teeth, by the way, it's hard to say. Somewhere behind you, a soprano voice begins an eerie rendition of a hymn, her notes curling through the fog like silk ribbons tossed into a river. You turn just enough to catch sight of her, Lady Norcroft, dressed in deepest blue velvet, her hair ornamented with small pearl skulls and what appears to be an actual raven's feather. Subtle. As her voice carries over the gathering, you realize something essential. The performance is just as much for the dead as the living. Midnight cemetery picnics are not about mourning, they're about memorializing with flair and style, and quite a bit of passive aggression if you're doing it right. You glance toward the crypt-turned-refreshment station where a group of guests have clustered. Someone is reading a dramatic monologue over a tombstone, possibly Shakespeare, possibly something they scribbled earlier that evening while over-caffeinated. Georgian society does love a good dramatic flourish, especially if it can be performed under candlelight with an audience fanning themselves to keep from swooning. You meander a bit, careful not to twist your ankle on the uneven ground. A pair of marble cherubs stare at you from a neighboring grave, their stone faces frozen mid-pout. You offer them a nod. "Nice wigs," you whisper, because why not? Soon, you're drawn toward the heart of the event, the picnic blanket enclave. It's more elaborate than you imagined. Candles float in glass bowls, glowing from within like captured moons. Folded tapestries have been laid out with almost ridiculous care. Brocade pillows, tiny mirrored plates, hand-painted teacups resting atop headstones, as if it's the most natural thing in the world to set your drink on a stranger's eternal resting place. You find your designated corner, marked, as is tradition, by an embroidered marker with your family crest stitched in gold thread. This isn't just a social affair, this is ancestral duty. You sit as gracefully as one can while navigating panniers and settle onto your pillow with a slow exhale, grateful for the moment of partial spinal relaxation. And then, out come the food bundles. Now, picnic is perhaps too casual a term. This isn't a collection of snacks tossed into a basket. This is a curated display of period-appropriate, mortally questionable delicacies. Someone passes you a plate of eel pie, its crust flaking like ancient parchment, smelling faintly of brine and ambition. You nod politely, place it beside you, and hope someone nearby likes eel. Next up, a spiced almond tart, less ominous, though you're fairly certain it contains enough cloves to stun a moose. Still, you nibble. At midnight, in the damp fog of a cemetery, even weaponized dessert feels charming.
You sip from your cup, warm punch with hints of cinnamon and what might be brandy. It burns gently down your throat, mingling with the perfume from the floating candles. The scent is complex. Wax, rosemary, citrus, smoke. Your fingers are now sticky, but elegantly so. A lady near you is passing around candied violets while recounting how her cousin once mistook laudanum drops for sugar syrup and spent an entire gathering reciting poetry to a fence post. You nod along, unsurprised. Laudanum is practically a condiment at these events. You recall bringing some last time yourself. Nothing screams refined remembrance like a light opiate buzz while reciting Keats over a gravestone. Historians still argue, the woman continues, offering a sweetmeat shaped like a coffin, whether these gatherings were acts of mourning or simply excuses for libertine indulgence. You smile. The answer is yes. You pick at a small plate of jellied aspic next. It wobbles with all the confidence of a nervous debutante, and you pretend to admire it before discreetly setting it aside. A nearby guest is enjoying a slice of something unidentifiable, but the sound of it makes you look away. You focus instead on sipping your drink and pretending you don't see the raccoon peering out from behind a mausoleum. Everyone ignores the raccoons. It's tradition. The conversation drifts like the fog. Bits of gossip here, existential reflections there. One woman shares a dream she had of her grandmother dancing through this very cemetery in a dress made of cobwebs. Someone else counters with a theory that the dead can hear you if your voice carries 3 tombstones. You test this by saying, "If you're listening, blink twice." Then
Someone to your left sneezes daintily into a lace-trimmed handkerchief. You glance over and see a man whose powdered wig has shifted just slightly off-center. Now it leans left, like a weary sentinel. His red velvet coat glints softly in the candlelight, and he's discussing burial plot real estate with a woman whose sleeves are so puffed she looks like she's hiding baguettes. You take another sip of punch. It's either getting stronger or your legs are going numb. The mausoleum is beginning to feel too warm, so you rise once more and step outside into the soft, clammy air. Georgian graveyards have their own special smell: damped stone, burnt oil from the lanterns, and whatever exotic perfume everyone decided to bathe in tonight. Yours has a base of rosewater and disappointment, with top notes of trying too hard. You wander between graves, trailing a gloved hand over ivy-cloaked stones. You come across a modest headstone that reads, "Beatrice T. She always danced alone." You nod in approval. If ever there was a time to appreciate someone's lone waltz through life and death, it's now. Then you hear it, a low crack, like a twig snapped underfoot. You pause, listen, nothing. But then another noise, a soft, rustling hush from behind one of the elder oaks. Probably someone sneaking off for an unladylike cigarillo, or perhaps an amorous tryst between 2 particularly daring souls in brocade. You're not here to judge. You are here to look composed and vaguely tragic. You decide to take a seat on a stone bench. It's slick with dew, but your petticoats are basically weatherproof. As you settle, you notice the small figurines arranged at the base of the nearest grave. Tiny ceramic angels, one missing its head. Charming. Next to you, a young lady in black silk is sketching something in a leather-bound notebook. You sneak a glance. It's not the gravestones, it's the people. She's capturing the living, not the dead. Precise little strokes of wigs, waistcoats, shoes posed just so. You smile at her. She doesn't look up, but she nods once, as if to say, yes, we are all ridiculous, and yes, it is beautiful. The conversation nearby shifts again, this time to mourning rings. A man in emerald green is explaining how some Georgian rings held tiny glass compartments with a loved one's hair, while others contained miniature portraits, or, even on occasion, powdered bone. You sip your punch with exaggerated calm. That's one way to keep Grandma close. He lifts his gloved hand to reveal his own ring, a delicate gold band set with black enamel and a sliver of braided brown hair under glass. My third cousin, he says proudly, Marjorie. She had 12 cats and 1 husband. Not sure which she preferred. Historians still argue, chimes in another guest with an amused tilt of her fan, whether mourning jewelry was meant to comfort or to show off one's grief like a seasonal accessory. You hum thoughtfully. Probably both. Georgian society didn't exactly do understated. In fact, the period thrived on spectacle. Mourning was an art form. Veils, cameos, symbolic motifs like willows and urns, even staged tears. Literally. One could hire professional mourners to cry on cue at funerals. A bit much, maybe, but you have to respect the commitment to emotional theater. The woman beside you reveals that she's actually wearing her aunt's ring tonight. Great Aunt Letty, she says, who ran away with a fencing instructor and was never seen again. Probably faked her death, but she had excellent taste in jewelry. She flashes the ring, a delicate oval stone encased in jet, and winks. You shift your posture, trying not to let your corset slice deeper into your ribs. It's a losing battle. You suspect your organs are now politely overlapping to save space. But the pain is almost meditative in a way, like, yes, I'm suffering, but fashionably. Nearby, another group is laying out more food. Preserved fruits, boiled sweets, slices of cake so dense they could double as architectural supports. You accept a square of gingerbread and nibble slowly, grateful for something your jaw doesn't have to fight. And then comes the storyteller. He's older, with a voice like worn velvet, and as he speaks, the chatter around him softens. Everyone turns to listen, naturally forming a circle. You rise from the bench reluctantly, the damp stone leaving a cold imprint on your skirt. The music's tender notes trail behind you as you wander back through the graveyard, feeling the weight of the night settling into your bones. The mist curls around your ankles like a playful ghost, teasing, coaxing, daring you to step off the path and into the unknown. You resist, of course, or at least you try. As you stroll, you pass by an unusual monument that stands apart from the usual weather-worn headstones and marble angels. It's a whimsical, almost fantastical structure. A small, domed pavilion, painted a soft cream color and decorated with intricately carved cherubs holding hourglasses and quills. This is the resting place of Lady Penelope Marston, whose midnight cemetery picnics are said to have set the whole tradition aflame. You pause to run your gloved fingers over the smooth stone, and a faint chill crawls up your spine. Lady Penelope's epitaph reads, "Forever feasting where shadows meet." You smile to yourself, imagining her ghostly silhouette, draped in velvet, commanding a spectral banquet beneath the stars. Historians still argue whether Lady Penelope's midnight soirees were eccentric expressions of grief or early examples of Gothic social rebellion. Either way, her legacy lingers like a perfume you can't quite place. Nearby, a group of young women are engaged in a curious ritual that catches your eye, the veil dance. They stand in a circle, hands lightly clasped, weaving silk veils through their fingers as they step softly across the grass. Their movements are fluid and hypnotic, like reeds swaying on a misty riverbank, and you feel drawn to join. Someone whispers that the dance is meant to honor the thin veil between the living and the dead at midnight, a practice said to help the spirits find peace, or mischief, depending on the dancer's skill. You decide to watch rather than participate. The veils swirl like clouds caught in a gentle breeze, and the music swells, a melancholy waltz played on a lonely violin. The dancers' faces are serene, eyes half closed as if peering into some distant shadowy realm. You can almost imagine the ancestors stepping forward to join the dance, their spectral forms shimmering just beyond the fog. Feeling a bit whimsical yourself, you move toward a nearby tree where a curious object hangs, a cluster of tiny glass bottles, each filled with shimmering sand from distant places. Someone explains that these are mourning sands, collected from cemeteries far and wide, each meant to carry a fragment of the deceased's essence. You pick up a bottle labeled Bath 1723 and shake it gently, watching the golden grains slip through your fingers like whispered secrets. You notice a small inscription on the bottle's stopper, "For remembrance, not regret." It strikes you as both comforting and haunting. After all, Georgian society was obsessed with the fine line between memory and mourning, how to honor the dead without being swallowed by sorrow. You pocket the bottle, deciding it might be the perfect keepsake, or perhaps a future conversation starter at the next dinner party. You imagine telling guests about the sand you carried from a midnight cemetery picnic, their eyes widening in a mix of fascination and polite horror. Nearby, a gentleman in a tall black hat offers you a cup of something steaming. You accept, grateful for the warmth, and take a tentative sip. The drink is a blend of mulled wine and exotic spices, with a hint of something herbal and slightly unsettling. You suspect it's the ghost pepper infusion, a recent craze among the more adventurous picnickers. Your tongue tingles pleasantly, and you smile, nothing like a little fiery reminder that you're very much alive. As you wander back toward the picnic area, you overhear a lively debate about the use of mourning symbolism in fashion. Some argued that black attire was a sign of genuine grief and respect, while others claimed it was simply a somber color fashionable enough to keep up appearances. You chuckle quietly to yourself, remembering the lady who wore pearls shaped like skulls earlier. Fashion as mourning or mourning as fashion. It's a classic Georgian conundrum. You pause near a headstone adorned with fresh flowers and delicate ribbons. Someone has placed a small book beside it, an anthology of melancholic poetry, its pages yellowed and fragile. You pick it up and flip through, finding a poem that begins, "When night enfolds the weeping trees, and shadows waltz upon the breeze, remember me, not with tears but song, for in your heart I still belong." You close the book softly, feeling a quiet warmth bloom in your chest. There's a tender beauty in these midnight gatherings, not just in the spectacle, but in the way they invite you to You awaken to the gentle crunch of gravel beneath hurried footsteps, eyes fluttering open as the first hints of dawn start to pale the edges of the sky. The cemetery is quieter now, the raucous energy of the midnight feast replaced by a hushed reverence that settles over the tombstones like morning mist. You sit up slowly, feeling the damp chill seep through your skirts and into your bones. The glamorous after-effects of a midnight picnic. Stretching your stiff limbs, you notice the early risers gathering their things, folding lace tablecloths and extinguishing candles with delicate care. The once elaborate spread of preserved fruits, spiced cakes, and punch now looks like a battlefield strewn with crumbs and empty glasses. You can almost hear the crumbs whispering tales of excess and secret indulgences. Nearby, a cluster of ladies in soft shawls and silk slippers are engaged in what looks like a somber ritual, tenderly placing sprigs of rosemary and lavender on individual graves. You recall rosemary's long-standing reputation as the herb of remembrance and fidelity. Historically, it was often burned during funerals to mask unpleasant odors, but Georgian society elevated it to a symbol of eternal memory. Quirky, right? Who knew that bouquet you got last week might have centuries of mourning vibes baked into it? You overhear someone mentioning that historians still argue whether these herb offerings were acts of genuine remembrance or more performative displays of mourning etiquette. You smile at the thought. Human nature hasn't changed that much. Sometimes we just want to look good while we grieve. Your gaze drifts toward the horizon, where the sun's first rays gently caress the tops of ancient yew trees, turning their dark silhouettes to gold. The cemetery, which looked eerie and secretive under moonlight, now seems peaceful and almost hopeful. It's a strange shift, like watching the same story through two very different lenses. You decide to wander toward a family mausoleum known for its elaborate carvings and whispered legends. The entrance is flanked by stone lions, their faces cracked and moss-covered, giving them an air of ancient, weary guardians. Someone tells you that the lions were placed to ward off grave robbers, which was a surprisingly common concern back in the Georgian era. After all, coffins could be sold for parts, and curious physicians were notorious for resurrecting bodies for their anatomical studies. Grave robbing was such a problem that families often went to great lengths, including hiring night watchmen and installing complicated locks. You pause, imagining a troop of masked grave robbers sneaking under cover of darkness, only to be confronted by snarling stone lions that didn't appreciate their late-night visits. It sounds like a gothic comedy waiting to happen. You chuckle softly, grateful your own midnight picnic requires less clandestine skulking. Inside the mausoleum's shadowy interior, your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through stained glass windows tinted in deep blues and reds. The air is cool and fragrant, with the faint scent of incense, a holdover from funerary practices to purify the space and comfort mourners. You notice inscriptions on the marble walls, each a poetic tribute to lives now folded into history. You stop before a particularly ornate plaque dedicated to Sir Edmund Fairfax, a gentleman known as much for his fashionable mourning attire as for his somewhat scandalous personal life. The inscription reads, "A soul clad in velvet and shadow, his absence a psalm in the night's hollow." You raise an eyebrow, thinking of the gentleman in emerald velvet from earlier. Surely he was a descendant. The scholarly debate bubbles up again in your mind. Some experts argue that Georgian mourning was as much about social performance as it was about personal loss. Was this elaborate display of grief masking uncomfortable truths? Or was it a sincere attempt to confront mortality through ritual? You think it's probably a little bit of both. You leave the mausoleum and wander toward a small pond at the cemetery's edge, where moonlight once danced across the water but now gives way to the early morning's soft glow. The pond is surrounded by weeping willows, their branches dipping like delicate fingers into the still water, creating perfect reflections that ripple in the dawn breeze. Nearby, a solitary figure stands quietly, tossing tiny pebbles into the water and watching the concentric circles spread outward. You recognize her as the sketch artist from the picnic, still clutching her leather notebook, eyes reflective and distant. She approaches quietly, and she offers a small, tired smile. "It's easier to draw the dead than the living," she says softly, "because the dead don't move or argue with you." The morning sun warms your face as you make your way down the winding path away from the cemetery, the chill of night slowly retreating like a reluctant guest. Your thoughts drift to the peculiar charm of the Georgian midnight picnic, a tradition so steeped in theatricality that it almost seems like a performance, a dance with death dressed in lace and velvet. You remember the curious detail about the lanterns. Some were filled not with ordinary candlelight, but with mixtures of herbs and resins intended to repel restless spirits, or, according to the more imaginative, to guide benevolent souls safely home. You smile, thinking how modern bug spray can't compete with that kind of mystique. And yet, historians still argue whether these herbal illuminations were more superstition or simple ambiance, which, honestly, might be the same thing. You pause by a row of ancient yews, their dark branches casting long skeletal shadows across the dew-damp grass. You recall that these trees were traditionally planted in cemeteries for their evergreen symbolism, eternal life, and their supposed power to ward off evil.
An old wives' tale says that the yew's poisonous berries kept both humans and spirits at bay, which makes the midnight picnic's proximity to them feel like a double dare. As you walk, your thoughts are interrupted by a sudden, unexpected sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping. You stop and glance around, spotting a solitary figure seated on a low stone wall. It's a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat who's using a small wooden stick to tap out a quiet beat on the weathered surface. He smiles at you and nods. "It's the old Morse code of the graveyard, or so they say," he remarks cryptically. Tappers used it to communicate during night watches, passing messages between the living and the dead, or perhaps just between sleepy guards. You raise an eyebrow. Morse code in a cemetery? That's delightfully morbid. You wonder if anyone ever sent a message to a particularly stubborn ghost, like, "Hey, move along, the party's over." You decide to join him for a moment, trying your own hand at the tapping, producing a clumsy rhythm that probably translates to something embarrassingly nonsensical in code. He chuckles warmly, the sound mingling with the gentle rustling of the yew needles. You think about how Georgians managed to combine such practical measures with elaborate ritual, blending the eerie with the everyday. The idea that nighttime in a cemetery wasn't just for mourning, but could be a vibrant social occasion feels both oddly comforting and a bit unsettling. You thank the tapper and continue your stroll, passing by a line of marble angels whose stone wings look as though they might catch the dawn's first light and flutter away. You recall the debate about whether these figures were meant to protect the dead or merely decorate their resting places with a touch of celestial drama. Ahead, you spot a woman carefully arranging flowers at a grave. She's dressed simply, without the finery of the earlier picnickers, and her face is etched with quiet sorrow rather than theatrical grief. You realize this is the other side of the midnight cemetery tradition, the sincere, personal remembrance that underlies all the spectacle. You approach her gently, and she looks up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "He loved these lilies," she says softly, gesturing to the blooms. "Every year I come here to bring them to him at midnight. The picnic, it's all very beautiful, but this is real." You nod, understanding that beneath the velvet gloves and powdered wigs lies a deeply human desire to hold on to the past, to touch the untouchable, to share stories that keep memories alive. You thank her and continue walking, your mind awash with the mingling of light and shadow, laughter and silence, tradition and personal grief. The cemetery no longer feels like a place frozen in time, but a living tapestry of countless stories woven through centuries. You pause once more at the gate, looking back at the path you've traveled. Somewhere behind the ancient stones, the echoes of midnight laughter and whispered secrets still linger in the air, as real as the morning sun warming your skin. And as you step out into the waking world, you carry a small piece of that strange, beautiful night with you, wrapped in lace, scented with lavender, and forever tinged with the mystery of the Georgian midnight cemetery picnic.
You wander into the village square, still caught in the afterglow of the midnight cemetery picnic. The streets are slowly coming alive with the morning market bustle, the clatter of wooden carts, the cries of vendors hawking fresh bread and honey, the cheerful chatter of townsfolk trading gossip like precious currency. It's a sharp contrast to the hushed reverence and shadowy mystique you left behind, a reminder that life, relentless and bustling, always reasserts itself after a night of reflection. You pause at a stall displaying an assortment of mourning jewelry, lockets, rings, and brooches fashioned from jet, a deep black gemstone beloved by Georgian ladies for its somber elegance. You remember reading that jet was thought to possess protective qualities against evil spirits and to help mourners carry their grief without succumbing to despair. Wearing jet was like wrapping yourself in a tiny suit of armor, stylish yet sentimental. You pick up a delicate jet necklace, feeling its smooth weight in your palm. There's a tiny lock of hair encased inside, curled meticulously and preserved forever. You shiver a little, half from the chill of dawn, half from the strange intimacy of carrying someone's strands of life.
Hair jewelry was a common practice back then, a physical connection to lost loved ones, an eerie but touching keepsake. You wonder if the wearer ever imagined it might spark conversation centuries later, or maybe just a few raised eyebrows at dinner. Nearby, a silver-haired woman adjusts her bonnet and shares a tale with the stall owner about a local legend, the weeping widow, whose spirit is said to roam the cemetery during the midnight picnics, forever searching for her lost husband. The story has been told so many times it's hard to separate fact from fiction, but the idea that spirits might mingle with the living at these gatherings adds a deliciously spooky flavor to the tradition. You listen, fascinated, as the woman claims the widow's ghost sometimes leaves a single white rose on a mourner's picnic blanket, a silent blessing or a warning, depending on whom you ask. You file this away as another delightful anecdote for later, the perfect blend of Gothic romance and local lore. Walking further, you spot a group of scholars gathered around a makeshift podium, debating passionately about the origins of the midnight cemetery picnic. Some argue it was an organic outgrowth of Georgian mourning culture, a way to cope with high mortality rates and strict social codes. Others suggest it was a reaction against the period's somberness, a bold, rebellious embrace of death's mysteries with a cocktail in hand. The argument echoes the wider scholarly debate. Was this practice a form of sincere remembrance, or simply an elaborate social spectacle? You smile to yourself, knowing that sometimes the truth lies somewhere deliciously in between. You watch a young man dramatically reciting a poem about twilight and loss, his voice carrying over the crowd like a spell. You recognize the style as quintessentially Georgian, full of flowery metaphors and melancholy charm, a far cry from today's blunt expressions of grief. It reminds you that mourning, like fashion, evolves but never quite loses its flair for drama. The morning light catches the shimmer of a silver spoon tucked into a picnic basket, reminding you of the culinary delights you tasted the night before, the spiced cakes, preserved fruits, and that surprisingly addictive punch. Food was a central part of the gathering, symbolizing life's sweetness amidst the shadows of death. You recall that some picnickers even prepared dishes based on recipes from the deceased's favorite meals, a culinary homage to memories preserved in flavor. You stroll past a small chapel where a priest is beginning the day's first service. The organ's deep notes resonate through the air, grounding the cemetery in a quiet solemnity after the night's revelry. You consider the role of religion in these traditions, how faith and superstition, mourning and celebration often walked hand in hand in Georgian society. As you prepare to leave the square, you notice a hand-painted sign advertising next year's midnight picnic, complete with an illustration of a skeleton wearing a powdered wig and holding a teacup. The humor and irreverence perfectly capture the paradox of the tradition, a dance between respect for the dead and a cheeky embrace of the macabre. You tuck the jet necklace into your pocket, feeling its cool weight as a talisman, a reminder that history is not just about dates and facts, but about the stories we tell and the rituals we create to hold on to what matters. And as you step toward the horizon, the village awakening fully around you, you carry with you the spirit of those Georgian ladies, their midnight picnics, their laughter and tears, their defiant celebration of life in the face of death.
You find yourself wandering toward the outskirts of the village, where the landscape softens into rolling hills dotted with wildflowers and ancient oaks. The air here carries a faint, earthy scent, the smell of damp soil and blooming heather, a welcome contrast to the smoky candle aromas of the cemetery. It's as if the world is waking up all around you, shaking off the remnants of night with a gentle yawn. Your mind drifts back to the curious accessories worn by the Georgian ladies at the midnight picnic. Delicate gloves embroidered with tiny skull motifs, fans painted with mournful scenes, and even parasols lined with black lace. These were not merely fashion statements, but deliberate symbols, subtle reminders of mortality woven into the fabric of beauty. Wearing them was a way to flirt with death while staying firmly in the realm of the living, like dancing on the edge of a grave without falling in. Historians still argue whether these symbols were empowering or morbid, a way to reclaim control over grief or a sign of obsession with the macabre. You think about how fashion often mirrors the time's anxieties, a kind of visual language that says, yes, I see death too, but I'm not afraid. You reach a small stream trickling over smooth stones and pause to watch the water's steady flow. It reminds you of the punch served at the picnic, rich with spices and sweetness, a liquid comfort that warmed hands and spirits alike. There's a story that the recipe came from an old apothecary's book, blending medicinal herbs with brandy and sugar to ward off chills and melancholy. Drinking it was like swallowing a little piece of bravery. Nearby, a group of children run laughing past a row of poppies, bright red flowers long associated with remembrance and sleep. You think of the fragility of life and the contrast between the innocence of youth and the solemnity of the cemetery. It's a reminder that these midnight picnics, with their shadows and candlelight, ultimately celebrated the full circle of life. You come across a weathered wooden bench carved with initials and dates, a small shrine to a lost love. The bench's surface is worn smooth by countless hands, a silent testament to the human need to touch and be touched, to leave a mark that outlasts a lifetime. You rest here a moment, feeling the rough grain beneath your fingers, the quiet heartbeat of memory. As the sun climbs higher, the light shifts through the leaves, casting dancing patterns on the ground. You recall that some Georgian ladies would attach tiny bells to their skirts during these picnics, not to summon spirits, but to signal their approach through the stillness. It was both practical and poetic, a way to announce presence in a place where silence reigned. The idea of bells in the night makes you smile. It's like a secret code for the living to remind themselves that they are not alone. Maybe that's what these picnics were really about, not just facing death, but insisting on life's persistence. Ahead, you notice an old stone wall, its surface mottled with moss and lichen, dividing the wild fields from cultivated gardens. Along the wall, wild blackberries cluster in tangled bunches, ripe and inviting. You pluck one and taste the sweet, tart burst of flavor, a simple pleasure that connects you to the earth and the cycles of growth and decay. You think about how these picnics blurred boundaries between night and day, life and death, mourning and celebration. They were a way to embrace the unknown with a wink, to toast the past while savoring the present. And as you rise from the bench, brushing leaves from your skirts, you feel a quiet gratitude for the strange beauty of it all. The midnight cemetery picnics, the laughter among tombstones, the defiant sparkle of life flickering in the darkest hours. You step forward, ready to carry this story into the waking world, wrapped in shadows and sunlight, forever dancing on the edge. The soft crunch of leaves beneath your feet guides you along a narrow path, bordered by wild thyme and elderflower bushes, their scents mingling in the cool morning air. You breathe deeply, savoring this unexpected gift, a sensory reminder that even in places associated with endings, life stubbornly flourishes. Your mind drifts to the peculiar role music played in the Georgian midnight cemetery picnics. It wasn't just about somber dirges or mournful hymns. There were lively tunes, fiddles and flutes weaving melodies that could coax a ghostly dance from even the most stoic gravestone. You recall reading about one fiddler whose eerie tunes were said to summon the spirits, though others insisted it was just an old tale to keep the curious at bay. Historians still argue whether these musical interludes were meant to honor the dead or simply enliven the living. You imagine the scene, the ladies in their flowing gowns, the gentlemen in their tails, all swaying gently beneath the stars as fiddle notes swirl around them like smoke. It's a surreal image, equal parts haunting and hopeful. Nearby, a weathered statue of a cherub holds a tiny trumpet to its lips, its face worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. You run your fingers over the cold stone and wonder if it ever played for these gatherings, a silent sentinel to the night's festivities. You spot a cluster of people gathered around a makeshift bonfire where a woman is softly singing a lullaby in an old dialect you don't recognize.
The melody is soothing, like a whispered secret passed down through generations, carrying with it the bittersweet ache of love and loss. You find yourself drawn closer, mesmerized by the way the firelight flickers across the faces, some joyful, some somber, all connected by the shared experience. It's moments like these that remind you that rituals are about community as much as remembrance. One of the listeners explains that singing was believed to strengthen the bonds between the living and the dead, a bridge woven from sound and spirit. The idea makes you think of how music often serves as a universal language, transcending even death's silence. You pull your shawl tighter against the morning breeze and consider how the interplay of light and shadow, the flicker of candle flames, the glow of the moon, the dawn's first blush, added layers of meaning to the midnight cemetery picnics. Each element worked together, creating a delicate balance between the eerie and the intimate. As you walk on, you pass an old well, its stones slick with moss. The well was once a source of water for the cemetery's caretakers, but local lore holds that it's also a portal to the spirit world, a place where wishes whispered into the depths might reach beyond. You pause, imagining the whispered hopes and fears cast into the darkness over centuries. Did anyone ever truly believe their wishes were heard? Historians still debate whether these beliefs were widespread or the romantic invention of later storytellers, but the allure of the well's mystery remains undeniable. You leave the well behind and enter a small grove where the sunlight filters through in golden shards. The air is thick with the hum of bees and the distant call of a cuckoo. You spot a patch of foxgloves swaying gently, and remember how these beautiful, deadly flowers were once associated with fairies and magic, fitting symbols for a tradition steeped in otherworldly charm. The grove feels like a secret haven, a quiet counterpoint to the night's wild celebrations. Here, in the soft embrace of nature, the boundary between life and death feels less sharp, more like a gentle invitation to pause and reflect. You sit on a fallen log, letting the peacefulness settle over you like a warm blanket. The echoes of fiddle music and whispered prayers fade into the background, replaced by the soothing rhythm of your breath and the soft rustle of leaves. And as you close your eyes, you realize that the midnight cemetery picnics were not just about confronting mortality. They were a way to find beauty in the fleeting, to celebrate connection in the face of loss, and to remind ourselves that even in darkness there is light.
The scent of damp earth and crushed lavender surrounds you as you continue along a winding path flanked by gravestones, each one telling a quiet story of lives long past. You run your fingers over the cold marble, feeling the carved names and dates worn smooth by time, and imagine the hands that once held these stones with tender care. The Georgian Midnight Cemetery Picnic wasn't just a social event, it was a ritual steeped in memory and respect. You recall how Georgian ladies meticulously prepared their picnic baskets, packing not just food and drink, but small tokens of remembrance, handwritten letters, embroidered handkerchiefs, and pressed flowers gathered from the cemetery grounds. These personal mementos transformed the gathering from a mere party into a sacred act of connection. It's touching to think of their delicate fingers arranging such treasures under the moonlight, their breath visible in the cold air, hearts both heavy and hopeful. Historians still argue whether these tokens were intended primarily for the living to cope with grief, or as offerings to the spirits themselves. Either way, they added an intimate layer to the midnight ritual that elevated it beyond mere spectacle. You stop at a particularly ornate gravestone, its surface decorated with a carved willow tree, an ancient symbol of mourning and resilience. Nearby, a small bouquet of wildflowers leans against the stone, their bright colors a stark contrast to the gray stone. It reminds you of the delicate balance between sorrow and celebration, death and life. The picnic fare itself reflected this balance. Spiced cakes, fruit preserves, and rich meats sat alongside bittersweet herbal teas and brandy, creating a feast that pleased both body and soul. You think about how sharing food has always been a way to bridge gaps between generations, between the living and the dead. A peculiar custom you read about involved incorporating edible flowers into the dishes: violets, roses, and elderflowers, each chosen for their symbolic meanings of love, remembrance, and protection. You smile at the idea of dining on a salad that might also be a bouquet, or sipping tea that smells like a secret garden. Nearby, you overhear a group discussing the etiquette of these picnics, how guests were expected to dress in morning attire, but with hints of flamboyance, a splash of bright ribbon, or a feathered hat, as a nod to the dual nature of the event. The blending of solemnness and celebration was a careful dance, and mastering it was a social art form. You think about how the picnics might have helped people reclaim a sense of control over death, transforming fear into a shared experience marked by humor and beauty. It's a reminder that grief doesn't always look like sadness. It can be bright, messy, and even a little rebellious. As you walk on, you catch sight of a woman quietly tending to a small garden of herbs beside a family crypt. She's gathering sprigs of rosemary and sage, plants long believed to have protective powers and the ability to cleanse spirits. The practice of planting and harvesting herbs in cemeteries was common, intertwining practical medicine with spiritual belief. You recall the herbal lanterns again, their flickering lights infused with rosemary and lavender, and wonder if the scent of these plants lingered in the air long after the picnickers had gone, like a ghostly perfume. You continue along the path, the first rays of sun catching on dew-kissed petals, and feel a profound sense of connection to the past, to the earth, and to the complex human emotions woven into this peculiar tradition. The Georgian Midnight Cemetery Picnic wasn't just an event, it was a living story, told in light, shadow, and the tender language of remembrance. As you follow the faint trail leading away from the garden, the terrain softens into a patchwork of wild grasses and tiny blooming bluebells, their delicate petals nodding gently in the morning breeze. The peacefulness is a stark contrast to the lively energy of the midnight picnic, yet somehow both moments feel threaded together by the same reverent thread, a dance between life and death, laughter and tears. You pause, remembering the curious use of perfumes and scents at these gatherings. Georgian ladies didn't just rely on candles and flowers. They often carried small sachets filled with fragrant herbs, lavender, rosemary, and sometimes even crushed ambergris, a rare and oddly marine-smelling substance derived from whales. The combination was intended to ward off decay's stench, but also to entice the spirits with pleasant aromas. You think about how our noses can trigger memories and feelings, and wonder if these sachets helped picnickers feel close to the departed. Historians still debate whether these aromatic rituals were practical or purely symbolic, but the idea that scent could bridge the worlds of the living and dead is undeniably poetic. You imagine the mingling smells, earthy moss, smoky candle wax, sweet herbs, forming an invisible tapestry of memory and magic. Ahead, you spot a cluster of ornate gravestones topped with carved angels, their wings spread protectively over the names below. Their serene faces remind you that faith and superstition were deeply entwined in Georgian mourning culture. Some picnickers believed these angels could guide souls to the afterlife or offer comfort to the grieving. Others thought they were silent witnesses, watching the living celebrate their dead with a mix of skepticism and solemnity. You recall the debate you heard earlier about whether the midnight cemetery picnics were subversive acts of defiance against strict religious norms, or simply an extension of faith expressed in unique, culturally specific ways. Either way, the blending of ritual and revelry created a space where belief was fluid and mystery was welcomed. A sudden breeze stirs the leaves, carrying the faint sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the village below. You smile to yourself, imagining the last stragglers bidding farewell to the cemetery, their spirits lighter from the night's mingling of remembrance and merriment. You kneel briefly to inspect a patch of moss growing thickly on a weathered gravestone. The moss's velvety texture contrasts with the cold, hard stone, nature's soft touch reclaiming human memory. It reminds you of how time gently erases sharp edges, turning pain into something tender and almost beautiful. Nearby, a small black cat pads silently through the shadows, its yellow eyes glinting like tiny lanterns. You remember that cats were often considered guardians of the spirit world in folklore, watchful companions who could see what humans could not. You chuckle softly at the thought that perhaps the feline is a more reliable mourner than some of the living guests you encountered. Continuing your walk, you come upon an old wrought iron gate, its paint chipped and rusted but still standing firm. Beyond it lies a family mausoleum, its heavy door slightly ajar. You hesitate, then step inside the cool darkness, the scent of aged stone and faint incense wrapping around you. Inside, you notice a small collection of personal items left by visitors: worn photographs, pressed flowers, and a faded ribbon. These tokens whisper stories of love and loss, of families who returned year after year to honor their ancestors in this intimate space. You realize that the Midnight Cemetery picnic was, at its heart, about holding space, for memory, for community, for the delicate balance of life and death. It was a tradition that acknowledged grief without letting it consume, that found humor and warmth amid shadows. As you step back into the light, you carry with you a sense of quiet awe for the women who planned these picnics, whose courage and creativity turned mourning into celebration, and whose legacy still lingers in the cool night air. You step out from the mausoleum into the gentle glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows over the cemetery's familiar contours. The transition from morning's soft light to evening's golden hues mirrors the shifting moods of the Georgian midnight picnics, where somber reflection gives way to vibrant celebration. You notice the delicate interplay of light filtering through twisted branches, painting the ground with intricate lace-like patterns, much like the ladies' veils and lace collars that fluttered in the cool night air. The picnic's food spread often featured an intriguing variety of delicacies: cold meats, spiced fruitcakes, and a curious item called funeral biscuits, dry, mildly sweet treats served with thick cream or preserves. These biscuits were traditionally associated with mourning, but became part of the festive fare, blurring lines between sorrow and joy. You can almost hear the gentle crunch of biting into one, paired with soft laughter and polite conversation. Historians still debate whether the inclusion of such symbolic foods was an act of defiance against grief or a sincere expression of remembrance. Either way, it underscores how food can be a powerful medium for memory and emotion. Nearby, you spot a circle of ladies seated on plush blankets, their gowns shimmering in the fading light, faces animated as they exchange stories and secrets. Their makeup was subtle yet purposeful, pale faces with just a hint of rouge, emphasizing a ghostly beauty. Some even used a little white lead powder, a risky practice, but one embraced for its eerie, otherworldly effect. You cringe slightly, knowing modern science wouldn't approve, but appreciate the lengths to which they went to evoke the spirit of the occasion. A peculiar tradition involved the use of mourning jewelry, lockets containing hair from lost loved ones, rings engraved with tiny skulls, and bracelets made of woven black silk. These pieces were both personal and public declarations of grief, worn proudly as badges of remembrance and symbols of social status. You imagine the quiet pride in these tokens, a tangible connection to those gone before. The air is filled with the soft rustle of silk and the occasional clink of glass as toasts are made to absent friends and family. You remember how some picnickers brought small lanterns shaped like coffins or skulls, their flickering lights casting eerie yet beautiful glows. It's a hauntingly poetic image, death's darkness pierced by tiny flames of warmth and defiance. You pause near a statue of a grieving angel, its face tilted downward, wings curled protectively. The craftsmanship is exquisite, every detail carved with loving precision. It stands as a silent guardian over the memories held within the cemetery's walls, much like the picnics themselves, a blend of art, ritual, and remembrance. As twilight deepens, you hear the faint sound of a church bell tolling in the distance, marking the hour. It's a reminder that time moves inexorably forward, even in places where the past lingers so palpably. You find a comfortable spot on a moss-covered stone and settle in, feeling the day's warmth ebbing and the night's chill approaching. Your thoughts drift to the brave Georgian ladies who, in the face of loss and societal expectations, chose to reclaim death's narrative, turning it into a night of courage, connection, and even joy. The picnic, with all its paradoxes, invites you to see mortality not as a final curtain, but as a complex, living story, full of shadows and laughter, sorrow, endings, and beginnings. And as the stars begin to twinkle overhead, you feel yourself gently drawn into that timeless dance. You lean back against the cool stone, the night wrapping around you like a velvet cloak, heavy with the scent of damp earth and flickering candle smoke. The cemetery feels alive, not with ghosts exactly, but with the echoes of stories whispered long ago by those Georgian ladies who dared to picnic where most would fear to tread. You think about how they transformed the cemetery from a place of quiet sorrow into a vibrant stage for remembrance and community. The idea of gathering amid tombstones to share food, laughter, and stories seems almost rebellious, a joyful refusal to let grief have the final word. It's a tradition that turns the grim into the graceful, the dark into a kind of celebration. Historians still debate whether these picnics were a form of social resistance or simply an extension of accepted mourning customs, but either way, they reveal a deeply human desire to find light amid shadow. You imagine the flickering candlelight reflecting in the eyes of those women, bright, defiant, alive. The food, the music, the embroidered gloves, the herbal lanterns, and even the quirky tokens of remembrance all come together like pieces of a puzzle that form a picture of life's fragile beauty. You remember the layers, the playful jokes amid the somber hymns, the delicate lace mingled with skull motifs, the fragrant herbs masking decay's inevitability. You close your eyes and breathe in deeply, the cool night air filling your lungs. It's a moment suspended between past and present, between memory and dream. The distant hoot of an owl calls softly, and you smile, knowing that even in the quietest places, life continues its slow, steady dance. The midnight cemetery picnic was not just a historical curiosity, it was a heartfelt ritual reminding us all to face our fears with courage, to honor our loved ones with joy, and to embrace the mystery of mortality with open hearts. As you rise to leave, you carry this story gently with you, a lantern flickering in the dark, a promise that even in the most unlikely places, warmth and connection can be found. Wind down. Now let your breathing slow and soften, your body sinking deeper into the comfort of your bed. Imagine the gentle sway of leaves outside your window, the faint rustle like a lullaby carried on the breeze. The memories of those midnight picnics linger softly, like a delicate scent fading into the night air. Picture the candlelight's warm glow dimming slowly as dawn approaches, the shadows retreating to welcome the new day. Feel the gentle pull of sleep as it wraps around you, a comforting embrace that promises rest and renewal. You are safe here, in this quiet space between waking and dreaming. The stories of the past settle around you like a soft quilt, weaving threads of courage and kindness through the night. So, as your eyes grow heavy and the world fades gently away, carry with you the peace that comes from knowing that life and death are part of the same beautiful, endless dance. Good night, and may your dreams be soft and sweet.